When mixing rock or metal, or really anything heavy with drums, drums are typically a very important part of the mix. Personally, I often find myself starting with drums in a mix to get a half dialed in sound to start building the rest of the mix around it. They typically dictate how everything sits around them in a mix, especially when it comes to overall level when mixing into your mix bus. What is up, guys? Alex from ANAK Creates here, and today I'm going to walk you through my drum mixing tactics, my typical approach on how to start from raw drum tracks to get them into a half dialed in place that actually sound like half decent drums to start mixing the rest of your track around. Now, a few things to note before we jump into Pro Tools. First, the files I'm going to be using in this video are available for download so you can play with them yourself. Just check that out in the description below. Second, this process happens before I even add samples, so I can really get to intimately know each microphone provided in a given drum track. If you're interested in my approach to using drum samples and how I choose the right samples, check out my video on that topic, which I will link in the description below as well as at the end of this video. And third, don't be afraid to ask questions, but please leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them, and you never know, it might end up being a topic of a future video. With that, let's dive in. All right, so first off, these are the drums that I was given. It's a pretty standard drum setup. Kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom. There's a Firecracker, which is kind of a small, high-pitched snare drum that's off to the side. And then there is a floor tom. There's no rack tom on this one. There's a hi-hat mic, a ride spot mic, overheads left and right, and a room left and right. So this is what I was given. All of this is at 0. This is how it was recorded. This is kind of the typical drums files, I guess, that you would get. So first off, I'm just going to play the tracks as is. This is just imported, literally nothing done to them so you can hear them. But again, if you want to download them, they are in the description below. So please feel free to go download them and play around with them yourself. But here is just the raw tracks. There's the Firecracker Snare. So that gives you an idea of what they're kind of doing. And now we're going to dive in and I'm going to just go through it as I would to start out a drum mix, how I'm going to approach this and just get it into a place that actually sounds like a drum kit that I can start building the rest of my mix around. Now, there is no other part to the mix for this one. We're literally just talking about the drums here. So we're just kind of thinking about what would be added to this if we knew what our drum tracks were going to end up being a part of. Now, I have kind of broken this down into a few steps that I do. So you're kind of going back and forth between things as you adjust, but there is a bit of a process that I typically do. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do the panning. So I'm a hard pan. I love hard panning stuff. Overheads left and right, 100% left and right. Room left and 100% right. And I know the hi-hat is over to the left. The ride is over to the right. Those are the spot mics. I want them to really help define where the hat and the ride go. So I know that I just want them panned hard left and right. The kind of in between is going to be dealt with by the overheads. The spot mics, I want it to really help bring that over to the hard sides. Then we have the floor tom, which I know is over to the right. And then we have the Firecracker Snare. And I know that this is one of the exceptions where I'm not actually going to pan it hard left. This is one of those things that I'm going to pan about 50 to 60% to the left because I know that it's a little bit over to the left. It is far on the side, but I don't want something as crucial as this Firecracker Snare. It is a snare, so I don't want it to actually be all the way over to the left. I still want it kind of in the middle while still being over to the side. So around 60% because it can still be pretty far over there. And then kick and snare, that's just going to be normal. And then I'm going to go on to the volumes. And there's some things that I typically like to do. For instance, I don't need the hat and the ride mic quite so loud. So just to start off, I'm just arbitrarily pulling them down. So you can kind of play it and bring the hat and the ride down a bit. Same with maybe the floor tom, maybe the snare bottoms, depending on the tracks that you have. Start soloing around and see what they sound like, how loud they actually are. Some people actually record with some of those mics lower in level, so when you put it up to 0, then it kind of sounds okay with the levels. Other people don't. So we're just going to play that and see what we have now. Now this is already sounding way better. Kick and snare, we'll just go through the kick and snare. So we have the kick in and the kick out. They kind of are already leveled enough. I don't need to bring the kick out down very much. The snare top and snare bottom. See, this is where, depending on how much snare rattle you want, this might change. So we have the snare top, and then we add the snare bottom. That's a lot of snare bottom to me. I want more of the top. I want a little bit of that rattle. So I'm going to bring it down and just soloing this. And that sounds a bit more like a snare that I would want in the mix to start with. We'll go to the Firecracker and do the same kind of thing. So we're going to solo the top and then add the bottom. Again, a lot of that snare rattle, which is good. I probably want a bit more of that in the Firecracker than I would on the real snare, because that's kind of the point. But I can bring it down a little bit. So there we go, but 5 dB. Probably good for me for this. So now we have that. Next thing is the rooms. The rooms are, again, they're very loud. So what I'm going to do, because right now the drum kit is basically all rooms, I'm going to group the rooms just because I want to be able to pull them down. I could put this on a stereo track. I like to deal with mono tracks, but you can also throw it in a stereo track as well. So I'm going to just bring the rooms down a bit, bring them all the way down, and then play the drum track and slowly mix them back in to see how they go. The other thing that I need to be aware of is the overheads. So I'm going to group the overheads because, again, I have 2 mono tracks for something you could put on a stereo track. But I'm just going to kind of see how those sit with the close mics as well. So again, it's way drier now because the rooms are down. I'm going to bring the rooms up. So that sounds pretty good to me. That's a good... It's got a bit of room to it. The overheads seem okay. This is just kind of basic levels to get me started. So next we're going to move on to what I would call step 2. And this is just the typical things that I know I'm going to do with in terms of EQ. And for me, I always like to roll off the bottom end on the hi-hat and the ride mics just because I want the definition of them. I don't want a whole bunch of body in those mics because there's a clouding up everything else. They just bleed from everything else most of the time. I really just want the definition. And I'm going to use SSL channels on a lot of the stuff that I'm doing here today because that's how I think. However, the principles of what I'm doing can be applied to any plugin you want to use, any EQs, any compression, anything like that. I just think fast on SSL channels, but again, that's not the only way to do it. Use whatever tools you feel most comfortable with. So first off, I'm just going to put my SSL channel on here, and right now I am very much into the BX Console SSL 4000E from Plugin Alliance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo the hat and play this. And then what I'm going to do is do what I know I'm going to do, which is roll off the bottom end. I don't want any of that. I might even pull out some more, 600. See, I just want the definition that I have right now. I'll bring this up so we can hear it a bit better. I just want the definition. So I'm going to also add a little bit of top end here. 4.4K right there. That sounds good. I want that definition. I want that attack of the hat to poke through everything. That's the whole point of this mic to me. So I'm just like decimating the bottom end. I don't need any of it. And then I also am going to add a little bit of compression on here because I just want it to be even. I don't need too much. One little light on the SSL kind of when it's really hitting is fine, just because there is a lot of bleed and I don't want to bring the whole bleed up too much right now. Same thing is going to do the ride. I'm going to go and find a section with the ride. So that's the ride mic itself. And I'm going to do the same thing. Again, putting on an SSL channel right here. And I just know that I don't want any bottom end on that. I'm trying to find the attack. And I'm just trying to find what sounds really natural. So, and I'm boosting this by 4 dB, 5 dB. That's fine. SSLs especially, but any EQ, if you want to add more, go for it. 7 actually sounds really good. We're going to go with 7K for this. It sounds really good, and I'm doing it by 5 dB. And then again, I'm just going to add a hint of compression. I am a very big compression person. I like compression on a lot of things, so I'm going to add just a little bit as well on that. When it's hitting with the SSL, even if it's not blinking the light, it still can be doing something, and it still is doing something in the background. So I'm just going to add a little bit of that. It's kind of flickering the light. That's fine. So that's really all I need for this. And those are just the things that I know I'm going to start with right off the bat. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and check the phase of all the mics. Now, this is a bit of a subjective process because sometimes it depends on what you're going for, what actually sounds better. What you want to do is you want to find this phase between the kind of kick in and kick out mic, like each mic on a specific instrument. And then you want to see how that kind of package, the kick, sounds with the overheads and sounds with the rooms. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole process with you. I'm going to skip ahead because it is a long, tedious process in some regards, or it can be, and it also is very subjective. So I'm just going to go from before to after. Now, if you're unsure about how to kind of go about dealing with the phase and what you're looking for and all that, I am going to make a video on that in the future. So leave a comment down below with your questions about it. But if you don't understand it, that's totally fine. You can still do the rest of this process without the phase flips and just kind of dealing with what you have in the tracks themselves. So as long as the drums sound good, it doesn't really matter. I just know that I like to go through the phases and just make sure they're all working together as nicely as possible to move forward, just because it's another level of something I can do. But if you're unsure about this, all good. You can move on to the next kind of step. So now I have the phase flips that I thought sounded the best. And for me, it turned out to be the kick out, the snare top and bottom, and then the hat and ride spot mics. But I'll just play a little bit of this and we'll take the phase flips off for a second, and then I'll put them back on so you can hear what's going on with these drums. So this is with no phase flips, how we had it. And then with without, with, without. You can hear how it just tightens up the bottom end, it tightens up a few things, and to me that just sounds better as somewhere to work with. Again, it is a very subtle change, but that is kind of how it is most of the time. You do need to be aware of the kick in mic versus the kick out mic, and the snare top mic versus the snare bottom mic, because they can actually directly basically cancel each other out, but that's just one thing that you need to double check. So again, I will be making a video in the future about phase and more diving into that. That is definitely a whole video on its own. So the next step we're going to do is the individual elements. And this is where I go through each of the individual elements, each of the individual mics, find the right EQ points, find what I'm working with, really dive into each mic and really understand it, which is going to help me later on in the mix so that I know, for instance, where is the kick point? Where's the natural EQ point in the kick drum, and how does it work with everything else in the kit? Because there's going to be a natural EQ point for a lot of different things. Where's the clarity in the kick? Where's the clarity in the snare? And you need to know what that kind of range is when you're working with it in context with the whole track, where you can push it to and where it sounds best naturally, so you can kind of build stuff around it. But also knowing that if that's the same point as the guitars, then maybe you can move it a little bit. But you'll only understand that if you really dive into each track. So I like to go through each track and kind of do that before looking at it as a whole picture again. So first, let's dive into the kick and just start adding. Again, I'm a SSL console person, so I already know that's what I'm going to add. But we're just going to play this section and start with the kick mic solid. So what I definitely want a little bit of compression. And what I'm going for with the kick is I want some bottom end. So I'm going to add a bit of, I kind of want a bell at about 70. It's a nice thing. I'm going to put that before the EQ, or the compression actually. I do want a little bit of that. It is compressing quite heavy. And then I don't want the muck in the middle. So I'm going to cut out some of this 500-ish. So you can hear when I pull that down, it just becomes a little clearer. And then I want to accentuate the top end, the attack of the kick. So I'm going to use these two and find where that is. So I landed on about 6.5K in the end, and I am boosting it by about 10. And that's fine. It's not doing too much to the snare bleed itself, which there is quite a bit of snare bleed actually in this. And now I'm going to put in the kick out mic. And again, I'm going to put an SSL just because that's how I like to do it. Now, the kick in mic is typically where you're going to get your attack. The kick out mic is where you're going to get a lot of the bottom end. We're just going to try and see what the kick out mic wants. So this is just the kick out mic. Still don't need a lot of that 400s, 450 muck in the middle. I'm just adding a little bit of attack on there as well. And then I'm going to see what they sound like together. And again, this is just literally playing around with this and seeing what sounds really good. Add a little bit of compression. I want the kick drum to be compressed because I just want it to hold that bottom end. So especially for this one, it is supposed to be bottom end, which actually I might add the roll off in there as well because that's what I want. I want more bottom end than anything else. So that's sounding pretty good to me, actually. So next, I'm going to go to the snare. So I'm just going to start with the snare soloed. So here's the SSL channel for this. I am going to roll off a bit of bottom end just because I don't need anything below 80, 70, 80 in there. I'm going to add a bit of compression. Again, I want that kind of... I need it to be a bit evened out. That's kind of my philosophy. So I'm, still only hitting it a little bit. And then with snare, I do want a bit of a body, a weight to it. So I'm going to find where that is. I'm going to add a bell here, and we're going to go to the bottom. Oh, 300 sounds really nice. Start there. And you can see I'm like 5, 6 dB of that. I don't like to cut out a lot of the low mids on this because I don't know what I'm going to use it for or how it's going to affect it. I need it there. But I do want to add a bit of crack and attack to it, so... That's a nice attack right there at about 4.8. Something in there. So that sounds pretty good. I might even add a bit more top end. Depending. About 9K, a little boost at 9. Sounds kind of nice. So this is with the new EQ, and then I'm going to bypass it. So that's the original. That's the new one. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom snare. I want the snare parts in there. So I'm going to add an SSL, which we're now looking at. And I'm going to, again, I don't need a lot of bottom out of this. I'm really concerned more about the bottom snare having the attack, the kind of rattliness of the snare. So I'm going to use this. That has a pretty nice little sound there. 4K for that. That's kind of what I want out of this. I'm going to roll off a bit more bottom. I don't need a lot of bottom. The bottom snare mic is for that snare rattle sound, so this will be fine. I don't need a lot of weight to it. I could, but for me, I'm not going to bother. Add them together, and now I can adjust the volume of the bottom snare. Now that it's actually what it's supposed to be, which is the rattle, I can kind of decide how much of it I want. Well, there we go. Oh, it didn't really change. So that sounds pretty good to me. And then I'm going to go to the Firecracker. So this one's kind of the same thing as a snare. So it's the Firecracker top. I'm going to add my SSL, my standard. Add a bit of top here. Don't need a lot of bottom. $7K sounds okay. 6 is probably where I like it the best. So I think I'm going to go with about 6K for now. That sounds pretty good. And then I'm going to take off a bit of the bottom, actually. Just 200, 300. This is supposed to be attacky. This is not, I don't need it to be much. At least that's how I feel at the moment. That might change. Again, that might change. That sounds good. Now we're going to add the bottom in here. See what it's doing. And we're going to add another SSL here. And solo that. It has a lot of that rattly stuff. About 5K. Actually sounds nice at 6. So they both have a bit of 6. So that's kind of 6 is a nice part for the Firecracker here. And then we solo it together. And I actually don't need a lot of bottom on the bottoms either. It's a bit muddy. So we're going to roll that off. Sounds pretty nice. And then we're just going to, if we want the volume, yeah, came down a little bit. I haven't compressed it. I'm going to compress it a little bit. A little bit of compression on the bottom there. But now that I have the compression and the EQ, brought the rattles up, so I can bring it down a bit to match the top snare. So now I have the Firecracker dealt with as well. Next thing is the floor tom. So we're going to go to the floor tom. Here's a floor tom section. A lot of stuff happening there, but we are going to, once again, what we want to do is add a bit of attack, add a bit of the body, and get rid of the muck in the middle. Same kind of thing as we've been doing with the kick and the snare. It's just finding the right points. So I don't need the really low stuff, so I'm going to roll off from 50, typically. A little bit of compression, why not? Let's actually start with the crap in the middle. Probably around 600. So what I'm looking for is, as I'm pulling this out, this is a lot pulled down, but I can hear where it's taking it out, where I could tell it's going to be natural when I add it back in. Because if you pull out, if I'm playing this and I'm pulling out a lot and I'm here, it sounds really weird. I can hear the hum. It's wrong. So 900's too high. It's not taking out the right stuff. But around 600, I'm not getting the muck in the middle that I would hear. It's obviously taking out too much. But now I know that's the right area of frequency that I want, and then I bring it back up. It's not scientific, but it's a good place to kind of understand what's going on. Add a little bit of compression with that. And then I'm going to add some attack. Where's the actual stick attack that I want to really cut through the mix? Six is actually pretty good. Don't need too much of that. And then some bottom end. We're going to bell this. Now this is a tough one because you're getting a bit of mud in there. But if we roll off some of the really low stuff, $300 sounds about right. So I'm going to keep it at 300. That sounds pretty good to me. I mean, it will be bigger in the rooms and in the overhead. So this is what I'm trying to get the definition out of the top end, especially for the toms, out of the actual mic itself, and a little bit of that bottom end resonance. So this is feeling pretty good to me at the moment. So next, we're going to move on. The hi-hat kind of been done. The ride's already been done. I already did those. Next, we're going to see what the overheads are doing for us here. Feeling pretty good. I like to add a bit, and this is obviously, if you have a stereo track, this is easier to do because I can't manipulate left and right at the same time. But I already kind of know what I do to it, and that is I roll off bottom end to about 200. I don't need a lot here. And I add a little bit of sheen on top, a bit of 12K. I want the overheads is a good picture of the drums, but it's also the cymbals for something like this. So I'm going to add that sheen on top. Yeah, 14 actually, that works. And a bit of 6. The point is I want the cymbals to be nice and on top of everything. And a bit of compression because, again, just trying to even it out a little bit. So that's kind of what I want from that. Bottom end's gone, top end's added. And then we copy it over to the other side, same thing. So here is the overheads with the EQ, and then we will bypass it. So that's before, and that's after. Next, I'm going to go to the rooms, and I just want to understand what the rooms are actually doing, what they sound like themselves. So they're pretty nice. They're pretty clean. There's not a lot of crunch going on. They're a good picture, actually, of the drums. So for now, I'm actually going to leave the rooms as is. I don't need to add much to them. I have to decide what I actually want the rooms to accomplish once I have the drum sound. Are they supposed to be big and really compressed and distorted, and like, do I want that kind of a sound? Or do I want them to just be a clean sheen, adding space to the drums? Is that what they're doing? Right now, I'm going to err on the side of clean and just having them add space to the drums. But it all depends on kind of the track that you're mixing it into and what your intentions are. So the next step that we're going to move on to is a kind of a rebalance. How does everything actually sound now that we've really boosted a whole bunch of stuff? Because remember, a lot of these EQs that I've done are like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 dB of gain. The volumes are going to be significantly different. So now I can actually go through and start crafting the drum sound itself. So we have our kick, and we know we like the kick sound itself. So we're just going to group them together, and same with the snare and the firecracker. We're going to group that together because we know we like the relationship between the in and out and the top and bottom snare. So they're kind of a package deal now, how loud the kick is and how loud the snare is. And right here, I have the mix bus, and there's literally nothing else going on. So I just have straight up mix bus so I can see where these are hitting in the level. And I want to pay attention to the mix bus and how loud these are, because where I place these now is going to determine where I put everything else in the mix around them. And you kind of have to pay attention because these are the loudest things, and then we're going to add more stuff to it. So if these are already peaking the mix bus, then everything else is going to just keep peaking the mix bus. We want to start out a bit smart with this. See, we're already peaking the mix bus. So I'm going to bring it down. So that's the kick, and then I bring down the snare, because they should be about level, perceived level. Obviously, that has nothing to do with the actual levels. But we're not peaking the mix bus. Sounds about nice. We're going to add the overheads. I like to add the overheads next, just because they're the kind of the overall glue that holds everything together. So that sounds pretty nice. Just going to loop this. Now we're going to add in the rooms. And there's a floor tom fill in here, so I'm going to go to the floor tom. Sounds pretty good. Nice balance in there as well. And there is the ride, so we're going to put in the ride. You can see as I put the ride mic in, you can hear the ride kind of shift over to that side. It really defines where the ride's going because we EQ'd it to have just the kind of the attack and the point of the ride. So that's why it kind of moves over to that side, which really helps widen out the whole drum image through the whole thing. So then we're going to do the same for the hat. We're going to find a section with the hat and the firecracker and that kind of stuff, and just do the same kind of thing. We're adding it in slowly. I want it to sit nicely with the overheads and not poke out too much. The kick and snare, I'm okay if they poke out a little bit more, but the firecracker I kind of want sitting in there nicely. And then the hat. Again, you can hear as I add the hat, it widens that out even more because I've added the attack over on the one side. So now that I can hear the whole thing in context, and that's literally everything, and we're not peaking a mix bus, this is kind of what I aim for. There's scientific levels as to what you're trying to go after. To me, I'm just trying not to peak, and then I can always bring this whole thing down. But I like to start somewhere, so that's kind of what I start with. And then that's kind of it for the basic getting it started. But what I've basically learned from this whole process is where the different EQ points are in the different mics and how they all work together, how the drum picture looks overall, and how they all fit together. So now I have a good drum sound to start building from. So if you remember, this is what it sounded like before we literally did anything. And now, with just the basic stuff that we did in this video, here's what it sounds like after. So now that you can hear it all together, you can move on to the next step, which is adjusting everything again and as you see fit. Now that you can hear a whole picture of drums, and it's going to change. None of this is set in stone. It's going to keep changing as you add more elements to your mix, as you hear the whole drum kit as a whole. And then at this point also you could add drum bus compression or back bus compression, and those are videos all on their own. So if you're interested in that, please leave a comment down below and I will explain how I do the next steps of my drum processing. But this video is just to get you to a point that you can actually hear the drum kit, start building other things around it, and to really help you understand each individual track in the drum kit and how it can be used in the mix and in the drum sound as a whole. The other thing that I would do at this point is I would also probably start adding samples. Now that I've really intimately learned what each track is doing, what the kick sounds like, what the snare sounds like, I can understand what I'm trying to achieve with the samples that I add, so I can add them strategically. If you are interested in my approach to adding samples and choosing the right samples and how to sample augment my drums, check out my video on using samples that I will link in the description as well as at the end of this video. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions of what to do next or where to go from here. I'd be happy to answer those questions and probably make more videos about this. That is it for this video though, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful. Subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any future videos, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, always be creating.